"Get up!" The voice didn't growl. It bored into the air like a cold drill. I said, "Get up, you useless waste of space." The boot connected with Sicel's ribs before she could scramble backward. It wasn't a nudge. It was a brutal, sweeping kick that sent her sliding across the polished marble of the great hall. The silver tray she had been holding clattered deafeningly, spilling vintage crimson wine across the pristine white boots of Prince Davian. The music stopped. The chatter died. 300 nobles of the Obsidian Pack froze. Davian stood over her, his eyes flashing a violent, unnatural gold. But Sisol didn't cry out. She didn't beg. She looked up, wiping a smear of blood from her lip, and for a split second the air around them shimmered with a static charge so potent it shattered the wine glass lying next to her hand. Davian's leg twitched. He looked terrified. That was the moment the world changed. The silence in the great hall of the Obsidian Pack was usually reserved for the Alpha King's entrance, or an execution. Tonight it was for a spilled drink and a servant girl who refused to stay down. Cecil tried to breathe, but her ribs felt like a cage that had suddenly become too small for her lungs. The pain was sharp, hot, and radiating, but it was the silence that hurt more. It was the weight of 300 pairs of predatory eyes fixing on her. The wolfless Omega. The runt. The girl with no scent, no shift, and no future. Prince Davian, the heir apparent, the brutal enforcer of King Valerius's iron will, stood frozen. His boot, still wet with the wine he had spilled via her tray, hovered slightly off the ground. Sissel pushed herself up on trembling arms. She expected the second blow. That was the script. Davian was the storm, and she was the debris. He had tormented the Wolfless staff for years, reinforcing the hierarchy that kept his father on the throne. Strength is law, weakness is death. "I apologize, Your Highness," Sissel whispered, her voice rasping. She kept her eyes on the floor, on the reflection of the chandeliers in the spilled wine. "I will clean it immediately." "Don't touch it," Davian snapped. His voice was breathless, strained. Sissel paused, her rag hovering over the stain. She risked a glance upward. Davian wasn't looking at her with the usual disdain. He was staring at his own leg. He shifted his weight, and a visible wince tightened the corner of his eye. "Davian!" King Valerius's voice boomed from the head table. The Alpha King was a mountain of a man, draped in furs that smelled of ancient forests and blood. He stood up, his heavy goblet thudding against the wood. "Why does the runt still breathe? She ruined your boots." The court waited. The expectation was clear. Snap her neck. Throw her out. Finish the job. Davian looked from his father to Sisol. The golden hue of his wolf faded, leaving his human eyes, a startling, stormy grey, wide with confusion. He took a step back, almost stumbling. "She," Davian started, then swallowed hard. He straightened his jacket, regaining his composure with a visible effort. "She is not worth the effort of killing, father. She creates a mess even when dying." A ripple of confused murmurs went through the crowd. Davian never spared anyone. "Get her out of my sight," Davian barked, though the venom lacked its usual bite. He pointed at the guards by the door. "Throw her in the lower cells until I decide what punishment befits spoiling a vintage harvest." "The cells?" Valerius narrowed his eyes. "For a spill, just toss her in the snow." "The snow hides the body," Davian argued, his voice rising strangely. "I want her to rot where I can hear her beg." Two burly guards, shifted partially with claws extended, marched forward and hauled Sisol up by her arms. She gasped as the movement pulled at her bruised side. As they dragged her past Davian, she looked at him one last time. He wasn't looking at the guards. He was looking at her hand, the hand that had touched the floor when he kicked her. His lips moved silently. To anyone else it looked like a sneer, but Sisol, who had spent her life reading lips and shadows to survive in a castle of monsters, saw the word clearly. Run. The doors slammed shut, sealing the music inside, and Sissel was dragged into the darkness of the stone corridor. But the heat of that strange static charge still prickled on her skin, and for the first time in her 19 years of life, the silence inside her head was broken. Can't let them see the burn mark. The voice was deep, panicked, and sounded exactly like Davian. But Davian was behind the doors. Cecil realized with a jolt of ice-cold terror. She wasn't hearing his voice. She was hearing his mind. The lower cells were not meant for prisoners of war. They were meant for things the pack wanted to forget. Damp, smelling of mold and rusted iron, the darkness was absolute. Cecil sat huddled in the corner of a cell that was more hole than room. The guards had tossed her in with little ceremony, laughing about how she'd likely freeze before morning. But Cecil wasn't cold. She was burning. The spot on her ribs where Davian's boot had connected didn't feel like a bruise anymore. It felt like a brand. She lifted her rough tunic, her fingers probing the skin. There was no swelling, no tender purple welts. Instead, the skin felt hard, like a callus, and hummed with a low vibration. What is happening to me? She closed her eyes, trying to calm her racing heart. Being wolfless meant she was technically human in a world of shifters, a genetic dead end born to 2 wolf parents. She had no inner wolf, no accelerated healing, no telepathy. She was the empty one. But the voice returned. Father suspects. He saw the flash. Everyone saw the flash. I have to get to her before the Inquisitor does. Cecil scrambled backward, hitting her head against the stone wall. Who's there? She whispered into the dark. Quiet. You fool, keep your mind quiet. The thought slammed into her brain so hard she physically flinched. It was Davian. It was definitely Davian. But how? Mind linking was reserved for the pack, wolf to wolf. An alpha could command his pack, and mates could speak across distances. But she was neither. She was nothing. I can hear you, she whispered, tears pricking her eyes. Get out of my head. I'm not trying to be in your head, Cecil. You're screaming in mine. You're projecting like a beacon. Footsteps echoed on the spiral stairs far above. Heavy, deliberate steps. They're coming, Davian's thought voice warned, sharp and urgent. Listen to me carefully. The Inquisitor, Lord Thorn, is coming down. He thinks you're a witch or a spy using some tech to disrupt the king's banquet. If he smells fear, he'll tear you apart. I am afraid, Cecil hissed aloud. Stop talking out loud. Think it. Just push the thought toward me. Cecil clamped her mouth shut. She imagined Davian's face, his cruel jaw, his grey eyes, and pushed the words at the image. Why are you helping me? You kicked me. A pause. The connection felt fuzzy, like a radio tuning in. I kicked you to push you out of the trajectory of the chandelier. Look at the ceiling, you idiot. Cecil frowned in the dark. She couldn't see the ceiling here, but she remembered the great hall. She remembered the static. My father's assassin rigged the glass above you. It was meant for me. You were just in the way. I kicked you clear. But when I touched you... The mental voice trailed off, filled with a sudden, overwhelming confusion that washed over Cecil like a wave. When I touched you, my wolf didn't just recognize you. He knelt. The footsteps stopped outside her cell door. The heavy iron lock groaned. Cecil didn't have time to process Davian's confession that the Alpha Heir's wolf had submitted to a wolfless servant. The door creaked open, and a torch illuminated the cell. Lord Thorn stood there. He was a spindly man, an elder wolf with eyes like milky glass. He didn't look like a warrior. He looked like a dissector of insects. He held a silver instrument in his hand that ticked rhythmically. "Girl," Thorn croaked. "Stand." Sissel stood, her legs shaking. She tried to project confidence, but her mind was a storm. "Focus on the pain in your ribs," Davian's voice commanded in her head. "Anchor yourself. Don't let him see into your mind. If he finds out we are linked, he will kill us both tonight." Thorn stepped closer, the ticking device hovering near Sissol's chest. "The prince says you are clumsy. The king says you are a nuisance. But I saw the air crackle around you, little Wolfless." He reached out, his long, pale fingers brushing her chin. "Tell me, who are your parents? The real ones?" "I am an orphan of the pack, my lord," Sissel said, reciting the lie she had been told her whole life. "My parents died in the Northern Wars." Thorn smiled, revealing teeth that had been filed into points. "No, your parents died because they stole something from the moon goddess, and I think you might be the receipt." He jammed the silver device against her neck. It wasn't a scanner, it was a taser. Electricity, raw and blue, arced into her neck. Sissel screamed, but the scream didn't just leave her throat. It exploded outward. A pulse of pure kinetic energy blasted from her body. Lord Thorn was thrown backward, slamming into the bars of the cell door with a sickening crunch. The torch sputtered and died. Silence returned. Sissel stood in the center of the dark cell, her hands glowing with a faint, silvery luminescence. "Sissel?" Davian's voice was faint now, terrified. "What did you just do?" "I don't know," she thought back, staring at her glowing hands. "I think I just woke up." For 10 minutes, Sissel didn't move. Lord Thorn lay in a crumpled heap by the door, breathing shallowly, unconscious. The glow in her hands faded, retreating beneath her skin like embers cooling in ash. She felt exhausted, hollowed out, as if she had run a marathon in seconds. "Is he dead?" Davian asked. "No. Sleeping. Hurt," Sissel projected. She was getting the hang of it now. It felt like whispering in a crowded room, directed at one specific ear. "Good. If he dies, the blood debt triggers. I'm coming down." "No." Sissel panicked. "If you come, they'll know. I'm the prince. I go where I please. I'm coming to interrogate you." Minutes later, the heavy door at the top of the stairs opened again. This time, the steps were fast, aggressive. Davian appeared in the doorway, flanked by 2 guards. He looked at Thorn's unconscious body, then at Sissel. He didn't blink. "Thorn is old," Davian snarled at the guards. "He must have slipped. The dampness in here is a disgrace. Get him to the infirmary. I will deal with the prisoner alone." The guards hesitated. Thorn was a high elder. "Your Highness, we should report this to the king. Are you questioning my command?" Davian's voice dropped an octave, the alpha command lacing his tone. The guards flinched, their wolves submitting instantly to his authority. "No, Highness." They scooped up Thorn and dragged him out. As soon as the door clanged shut, the mask fell from Davian's face. He rushed to the bars, gripping them with white-knuckled hands. "Show me," he demanded. "Show me where I kicked you." Sissel approached the bars cautiously. She lifted her tunic slightly to reveal her ribcage. There was no bruise. Instead, there was a mark in the shape of a crescent moon, silver and shimmering, etched into her skin. Davian let out a breath that sounded like a curse. "The lunar seal." "What is that?" Sissel asked, her voice trembling. Am I marked for death?" "No," Davian whispered, his eyes scanning the corridor to ensure they were truly alone. "You're marked for the throne." Cecil laughed, a dry, hysterical sound. I'm a servant, Davian. I clean your boots. I don't sit on thrones. You don't understand, Davian said, unlocking the cell door with a key he pulled from his jacket. He stepped inside, closing the distance between them. For the first time, Cecil realized how tall he was. He smelled of rain and cedar and fear. The Wolfless are not mistakes, Cecil, he said, his voice low and intense. The legends say that once every 1,000 years, the moon goddess doesn't give a child a wolf because the child is the wolf, not a shifter, a vessel, pure silver blood. He reached out, his hand hovering over the mark on her ribs. He didn't touch it. My father, the king, he isn't the true Alpha. He seized power by slaughtering the silver bloodline 20 years ago. We thought he killed them all. Cecil felt the room spin. My parents were likely the true king and queen, Davian finished, and you have been hiding in plain sight, right under the nose of the man who killed them. Cecil backed away. Why are you telling me this? You're his son. You're the heir. Davian looked at her, his grey eyes filled with a conflict that seemed to tear him apart. Because the kick woke your blood up. And now that the seal is visible, every Alpha in this kingdom will smell it, including my father. So you're going to kill me, Cecil stated flatly. No, Davian said. I'm going to claim you. Cecil blinked. What? The winter ball is in 2 days, Davian said, pacing the small cell. My father expects me to choose a mate. If I choose a highborn wolf, you will be discovered and executed before the week is out. Thorn will wake up and talk. He stopped and turned to her. But if I claim you, if I publicly mark you as my chosen mate before they realize what you are, by pack law, you become untouchable to everyone but me. You want to marry me? Cecil asked, incredulous. You hate me. You've treated me like dirt for years. I treated you like dirt to keep you invisible, Davian snapped, though there was pain in his voice. If I had shown you kindness, the court would have preyed on you. I kept you down so you wouldn't be seen. He took a deep breath. I don't expect you to trust me. But right now, I am the only thing standing between you and a public execution. He held out his hand. Come with me. We have to get you out of these rags. We have to train you. If you're going to be the future queen, you need to learn how to not drop wine trays. Cecil looked at his hand. It was a large, strong hand, the hand of a killer, the hand of her tormentor. But in her mind, the link hummed with a sensation she hadn't expected. It wasn't deception. It was desperation. She heard his thought, unguarded and raw. Please take it. I can't watch another innocent die for my father's crown. Cecil reached out and took his hand. Fine, she said. But if you kick me again, Davian, I'll shock you until your teeth melt. Davian actually smiled. A crooked, fleeting thing. Deal. As they left the cell, ascending toward the castle that was now a hunting ground, Cecil didn't know that the shock of her survival was only the beginning. The seal on her ribs was throbbing, calling out to something buried deep in the forest surrounding the castle. Something ancient. Something that had been waiting for the silver blood to wake. And it was hungry. The transition from the mildewed squalor of the lower cells to the oppressive opulence of the upper castle was jarring. Davian had whisked Cecil through a maze of servants' passages, avoiding patrols with practiced ease, finally depositing her in a suite of rooms hidden behind a tapestry in his own wing. It was a gilded cage. The room smelled of beeswax and expensive lavender potpourri. Silken gowns, the colors of deep jewels, were laid out on a massive four-poster bed, a stark contrast to the rough hemp tunic scratching her skin. Cecil stood in the center of the room, shivering not from cold, but from adrenaline dump. The silver mark on her ribs throbbed with a dull, heavy ache, like a second heart beating against her bones. Davian paced the perimeter of the room like a caged animal. The golden energy of his wolf was close to the surface, making the air around him feel thick and electric. "This is madness," Cecil whispered, hugging herself. "I can't pretend to be a high-born lady in 2 days. I don't know how to walk, how to speak, how to breathe in a corset without fainting." Davian stopped pacing and turned to her. His grey eyes were hard, stripping away her defenses. "You don't have to learn how to be high-born, Cecil. You have to learn how to be royalty. There is a difference. Highborns simper and scheme. Royalty commands without speaking." He crossed the room in 2 strides, invading her personal space. He reached out, his fingers hovering just above the pulse point at her throat. The mental link between them flared, a sudden rush of his anxiety, mixed with a strange, grudging admiration. "Stop trembling," his voice echoed in her mind, softer than his spoken words. "If they see fear, they bite." "I'm not afraid of them," Cecil said aloud, lifting her chin defiantly, though her voice shook. "I'm afraid of you. You're the one who made my life hell for 5 years. Davian flinched. It was a microscopic movement, but Cecil caught it. He dropped his hand. "I told you. In Valerius's court, invisibility is survival. If I hadn't made you seem worthless, my father's generals would have taken you for sport long ago." He walked away to a heavy oak wardrobe and pulled out a velvet box. "You need to understand the stakes. My father didn't just kill the Silver Royals to take the throne. He did it because their bloodline was the only thing keeping the deep woods asleep." Cecil frowned. "The deep woods? It's just timber and deer?" "No," Davian said, opening the box to reveal a choker made of obsidian shards. "That's what we tell the Omegas. The truth is, the Silver bloodline acted as a spiritual fence. When my father slaughtered them, the fence broke. Things have been waking up in the outer territories for years, mutated things. Why do you think the patrols are doubled during a new moon?" He held up the choker. "Put this on. It will dampen your scent until the ball. It won't hide the Silver Seal's energy entirely, but it might buy us time." Cecil took the cold stones. As she clasped it around her neck, the throbbing in her ribs subsided slightly. "I need to know," Cecil asked, staring at his reflection in a tall mirror. "Why do you hate him? You're the perfect son, the brutal enforcer." Davian looked away, his jaw working. The mental link went quiet, excessively so, as if he had slammed a door shut in his mind. "Because," he finally said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Before he was the Alpha King, he was just an ambitious Gamma. And to rise that high, you have to sacrifice something you love to prove your loyalty to the pack above all else." He met Cecil's eyes in the reflection. "He sacrificed my mother." The silence in the room became suffocating. Cecil realized then that the brutality Davian wore like armor was just that. Armor. Underneath it, he was just another orphan created by Valerius's ambition. "I won't let him sacrifice you too," Davian thought, the projection fierce and unguarded. Cecil felt a strange warmth spread through her chest, a counterpoint to the cold Silver Seal. For the first time, she didn't push his presence out of her mind. 24 hours before the winter ball, the castle was a hive of panicked activity. Servants scurried with garlands of frosted pine and silver ribbons. The kitchen smelled of roasting boar and spiced wine. Up in the hidden suite, the atmosphere was suffocating for a different reason. The pressure was mounting. The seal on Cecil's ribs had stopped just throbbing. It was now burning. It felt like a hot coal pressed against her skin, sending waves of feverish heat through her body. She sat on the edge of the bed, her head in her hands, gasping for air. The obsidian choker felt like a noose. The door burst open, and Davian entered, carrying a tray of food she hadn't asked for. He stopped short when he saw her. "Cecil? What's wrong?" The mental intrusion was sharp with panic. "It burns," she choked out, sweat beading on her forehead. "It feels like something is pulling at me from the inside out." Davian dropped the tray. It clattered on the floor, ignored. He was beside her in an instant, his cool hands cupping her face. His wolf was close to the surface again, his irises bleeding into gold. "Let me see," he demanded, not waiting for permission to lift the edge of the silk robe he had forced her to wear. The silver seal was no longer just a mark. It was glowing with a pulsating luminescence, the edges raw and red. But it wasn't just glowing. Thin lines of silver light were spider-webbing out from the crescent moon, tracing the veins across her abdomen. "By the goddess," Davian breathed. "It's spreading. It's trying to complete the circuit." "What circuit?" Cecil gasped, gripping his forearms. The contact sent a jolt through both of them, a bizarre mixture of pain and pleasure that made her senses reel. "You need air. The stone walls are amplifying the energy." He pulled her to her feet, wrapping a heavy fur cloak around her shoulders to hide her identity and the glowing mark. "Come with me. The upper ramparts are deserted." He practically carried her up the winding stairs to the highest watchtower. The winter air hit Cecil's face like a slap of ice, momentarily cooling the fever. The night was clear, the moon nearly full, casting long, skeletal shadows over the vast expanse of the forest that surrounded the castle. Cecil leaned against the frozen stone merlons, breathing deeply. Davian stood close behind her, his body a solid wall of heat against the wind. He wasn't looking at her. He was scanning the tree line, his body tense as a bowstring. "Do you see them?" he whispered. Cecil squinted into the darkness. At first, she saw only trees. Then, movement. Far below, at the very edge where the cleared land met the ancient woods, shadows were detaching themselves from the darkness. They weren't wolves. They were too big, hunchbacked, moving with a disjointed, loping gait that looked painful. Their eyes didn't reflect light like normal animals. They glowed with a sickly, sulphurous yellow. There were dozens of them, waiting, watching the castle. A wave of primal recognition washed over Cecil, utterly foreign to her human upbringing. She knew what they were. "The Forgotten," she whispered, the name bubbling up from her blood memory. They used to be the guardians of the Silver Throne, but without the pure blood to guide them, they went mad. "They feel you waking up," Davian thought, his hand resting heavily on her shoulder. "They are waiting for orders, or waiting to feast. I don't know which." The realization was terrifying. Cecil wasn't just an heir to a throne. She was the key to an army of nightmares. A sudden, sharp pain pierced her mind. Not hers, not Davian's. It was an external intrusion, clumsy and violent. Davian grabbed her as she stumbled. "Thorn," he snarled silently. "He's awake." Below them, in the courtyard, alarms began to blare. Torches flared to life. "We have to go back," Davian said, pulling her toward the stairs. "Tomorrow night, everything changes. You either walk out as my queen, or we both die as traitors." As they descended into the chaos, Cecil looked back one last time at the forest. The yellow eyes were gone, but the sense of being watched by 1,000 hungry things remained. The grand ballroom of the Obsidian Pack was a masterpiece of intimidation. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen tears from the vaulted ceiling, casting prisms of light over 300 nobles dressed in their finest silks and furs. The air was thick with the scents of expensive perfume, arousal, and underlying aggression. King Valerius sat on a raised dais at the far end, a massive throne carved from black basalt. He looked bored, swirling dark wine in a goblet, his eyes scanning the crowd for weakness. Cecil stood just outside the massive double doors, her heart hammering against her ribs. The fever had broken, replaced by an icy calm. Davian had spent the last 12 hours drilling her on court protocol, on how to hold her head so the weight of the imaginary crown didn't break her neck. She wore a gown of deep midnight blue, the fabric heavy enough to hide the slight glow still emanating from her ribs, cut high to her throat to conceal the obsidian choker. Her hair, usually a messy brown tangle, was oiled and braided with silver thread, coiled high on her head like a coronet. "Breathe," Davian's voice echoed in her head. He was already inside, standing at the base of his father's throne, looking devastating in a military-style tunic rich with gold embroidery. "Look at no one but me. You are above them." The herald struck the floor with his staff. The doors groaned open. "Presenting," the herald boomed, faltering slightly at the lack of a house name on the card Davian had provided. "Lady Cecil of the Northern Reach." Silence fell over the ballroom faster than the wine glass had shattered 2 nights ago. Every head turned. Cecil stepped across the threshold. The whispers started immediately. "Who is she? I've never smelled her before. Is that the serving girl? No, it can't be." Cecil ignored them all. She fixed her eyes on Davian, who watched her approach with an intensity that burned. She walked the length of the ballroom, the silk of her dress whispering against the marble floor. The obsidian choker felt heavy, dampening her scent, making her seem mysterious rather than human. As she reached the dais, she curtsied low to the king, not a servant's bob, but a deep, graceful obeisance that Davian had forced her to practice until her thighs burned. King Valerius leaned forward, his predatory gaze sharpening. He sniffed the air visibly. "The Northern Reach, you say? I recall no noble houses left in that wasteland." Before Cecil could answer with the rehearsed lie, Davian stepped forward, offering his hand to raise her. "She is my guest, father," Davian said, his voice ringing clear through the hall. "And tonight, I intend to make her more than a guest." The crowd gasped. This was the claiming declaration. Valerius's eyes narrowed into slits. "You choose a nobody, a stranger with no scent and no lineage over the daughters of my generals?" "I choose her," Davian said firmly, pulling Cecil to his side. The warmth of his body was a comfort in the icy room. "Then mark her," Valerius challenged, sensing a trap but unable to identify it. "If she is worthy of an alpha prince, let the pack witness the bond." Davian turned to Cecil. This was the dangerous part. He had to bite her neck, to mingle his scent with hers publicly. It would solidify the legal claim, but the closeness might overwhelm the obsidian choker's dampening effect. He leaned in, his breath hot against her ear. "Trust me," he thought. Cecil tilted her head back, baring her throat. She felt his teeth graze her skin, sharp and demanding. "Stop!" The scream tore through the ballroom. The doors crashed open again, and Lord Thorne stumbled in. He looked horrific. Half his face was slack from the energy blast, and he dragged one leg. He was flanked by 4 of the king's personal elite guard. "Treason!" Thorne shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at Davian and Cecil. "The prince harbors a witch!" Davian pulled back from Cecil, spinning to face the threat, positioning himself between her and the guards. A low growl ripped from his chest, deep and vibrating. Valerius stood up, his massive frame casting a shadow over the dais. "Explain yourself, Inquisitor." and it better be good, interrupting my son's claiming. Thorn hobbled forward, pulling something from a velvet pouch at his belt. It was the melted ruin of the silver taser he had used on Sissel. She has no wolf, my king. But when I tested her, she blasted me with raw energy. She is an abomination, a human witch hidden in your kitchens. Thorn's milky eyes fixed on Sissel with venomous hate. And the prince knows it. He attacked me in the cells to silence me. The mood in the room shifted instantly, from curiosity to murderous hostility. The guards shifted into their semi-wolf forms, claws extending. "Is this true, Davian?" Valerius's voice was quiet now, which was far more terrifying than his shouting. Davian didn't back down. His own claws lengthened, tearing through the expensive gloves he wore. Thorn is senile and paranoid. He attacked an innocent woman. "Then prove her innocence," Valerius commanded. He pointed a thick finger at Sissel. "Strip her. Search her for marks of witchcraft. If she is clean, I will execute Thorn for his insolence. If she is marked, I will execute you both." "No one touches her," Davian roared. His human form seemed to crack, fur sprouting along his jawline, his shoulders broadening violently as the alpha shift began to take hold, fueled by rage and protective instinct. He pushed Sissel behind him. "Run for the side door when I attack," he projected, his mind a chaotic storm of fury. Sissel took a step back. The heat in her ribs was unbearable now. The seal was reacting to Davian's rage, to the imminent violence. Before the guards could advance, a deep, resonant boom echoed through the castle walls. The floor shook violently, knocking several nobles off their feet. Dust rained down from the ceiling. Another boom, closer this time. The main doors to the ballroom buckled inward. Someone screamed, "The outer walls! Something has breached the outer walls!" Sissel felt the blood drain from her face. It wasn't witchcraft. It wasn't treason. The Forgotten had arrived for their queen. The magnificent double doors of the great hall, reinforced with iron bands and centuries of alpha commands, didn't just open, they exploded inward. Splinters of ancient oak became lethal projectiles, slicing through silk gowns and tailored suits. The screaming began instantly, a cacophony of terror that drowned out the festive music. But it wasn't the debris that caused the panic. It was what stepped through the breach. They were nightmares dragged from the deepest, darkest folklore of the pack, the Forgotten. They were enormous, easily twice the size of a shifted alpha, but their proportions were wrong. Their spines were hunched and twisted, covered in matted, patchy fur that smelled of wet earth and decay. Their limbs were too long, ending in claws that scraped grooves into the marble floor. But it was their eyes, sulphurous, glowing yellow orbs devoid of pupils or sanity, that froze the blood in Sissol's veins. There were dozens of them, pouring into the ballroom like a mudslide of muscle and teeth. "Guard! Defend the king!" Valerius roared, his voice shaking the chandeliers above the din. He shifted instantly, his massive black wolf form erupting from his robes, leaping from the dais to meet the first wave of the creatures. The ballroom dissolved into absolute chaos. Nobles shifted, tables were overturned, and the metallic tang of blood quickly overpowered the scent of perfume. Davian didn't shift. Not yet. He grabbed Sissol's arm, his grip bruising in his urgency. "Stay behind me. Do not move away from my back. Do you understand?" He pulled a long, silver dagger from his boot, a weapon he wasn't supposed to have at a peacetime ball. He began to carve a path through the panicked crowd towards a side exit, slashing at a forgotten creature that lunged at them with snapping jaws. The creature recoiled, shrieking a sound that vibrated in Sissol's teeth. It didn't bleed red. It bled a thick, black ichor that sizzled where it hit the floor. Sissel stumbled along behind Davian, her mind a whirlwind of terror and a strange, growing pressure in her chest. The seal on her ribs was burning with an intensity that made her gasp. It felt like a magnet was buried in her flesh, pulling her not toward the exit, but toward the center of the room, toward the monsters. They are looking for something, Sissel realized, the thought cutting through the panic. They weren't killing indiscriminately. They were batting nobles aside like annoying flies, their glowing yellow eyes scanning, sniffing, hunting. "There!" Lord Thorne's voice screeched above the fray. The Inquisitor hadn't run. He had been waiting in the shadows near the dais. As Davian was occupied parrying a massive claw swipe from one of the creatures, Thorne lunged from behind a overturned table. He didn't attack Davian. He grabbed Sissel by the back of her neck. "Let the beasts have their witch!" Thorne yelled, his milky eyes wild with vindictive triumph. He yanked her backward violently. Sissel flailed, her hands clawing at her throat as the obsidian choker, the only thing dampening her true scent, snagged on Thorne's rings. The clasp snapped with a sharp metallic ping. The necklace clattered to the floor, lost under the trampling feet of the flea crowd. Time seemed to warp. The noise of the battle didn't stop. But for Sissel, everything went silent except for the thunderous beating of her own heart. Without the obsidian damper, her scent hit the air like a physical blow. It wasn't the musk of a wolf or the sweat of a human. It was the smell of ozone before a lightning strike, cold iron and crushed winter flowers, a scent so pure, ancient, and overwhelmingly powerful that it defied categorization. Every shifted wolf in the room froze, their noses twitching, confusion overriding their bloodlust. Davian spun around, his grey eyes wide with horror as he realized what Thorne had done. He punched the old wolf squarely in the jaw, sending him sprawling, but it was too late. The nearest forgotten creature, a towering monstrosity with half a face tore away from old scars, stopped mid-lunge toward a guard. Its massive head snapped toward Sissel. Its nostrils flared, inhaling deep draughts of the air. Then, slowly, impossibly, the creature lowered its massive bulk to the blood-slicked marble. It didn't attack. It whimpered, a high, keening sound of pathetic recognition. It knelt. The silence that fell over the ballroom was heavier than the violence that had preceded it. The fighting stopped. Guards, nobles, and the king himself stood frozen in various states of shift, staring at the impossible scene in the center of the room. The Wolfless servant girl stood surrounded by 3 massive kneeling monsters. The heat emanating from her body had burned through the delicate silk of her bodice, revealing the glowing silver crescent moon glowing fiercely on her ribs, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. King Valerius shifted back to his human form, naked and panting, his body covered in black ichor and cuts. He stared at Sissel, his face draining of color until he looked like a ghost. The arrogance that usually defined his features was replaced by a dawn of terrifying realization. "No," Valerius whispered, his voice hoarse. "It's not possible. I killed them. I killed every last one of them." He looked from the glowing mark on Sissol's chest to the kneeling forgotten, the ancient guardians of the silver throne, beasts that only obeyed the true bloodline. The truth hung in the air, undeniable and devastating to his 20-year reign. Valerius's shock curdled instantly into murderous rage. He had sacrificed everything, his honor, his mate, his soul, to seize this throne. He would not lose it to a slip of a girl he had used as a footstool. "Kill her!" Valerius roared to his elite guard, pointing a shaking finger at Sissel. "She is controlling the beasts. She is a necromancer. Kill the witch before she destroys us all." The elite guard, conditioned to absolute obedience, hesitated only for a second. Their loyalty to the Alpha King warred with the ancient, instinctual reverence their wolves felt for the silver scent filling the room. But training won out. 4 massive wolves snarled and began to advance on Sisol. "No!" The roar didn't come from the king. It came from Davian. He shifted mid-stride, his body exploding into his wolf form, a magnificent creature of storm grey and gold fur, larger than any other wolf in the room save his father. He leaped over Sisol, landing between her and the advancing guards, his teeth bared in a defensive snarl that shook the floorboards. He was defying a direct command from his Alpha King. It was high treason. It was a death sentence. "Davian, don't!" Sisal projected, her mind reeling from the sheer volume of mental noise in the room. The fear of the crowd, the rage of the king, and the confusing, mournful cries of the forgotten in her head. "I told you," Davian's voice came back, clear and resolute in her mind. "I am the only thing standing between you and execution. I meant it." He braced himself as the 4 elite guards attacked simultaneously. Davian fought with a ferocity born of desperation, a whirlwind of teeth and claws holding the line around Sisal. But he was outnumbered, and behind the guards, Valerius was preparing to attack, his eyes fixed on Sisal with lethal intent. Sisal watched Davian taking hits meant for her, his golden fur slick with blood. She felt the confusion of the kneeling forgotten. They wanted to defend her, but they were waiting for an order she didn't know how to give. "Help him," she mentally screamed at the creatures. The forgotten whimpered, confused. "Must have anchor." A disjointed, ancient thought echoed back to her. They needed guidance. They were raw power without direction, just like her. Cecil looked at Valerius, who was now charging past his guards, straight for her throat. She saw the hate in his eyes, the hate of a usurper facing his reckoning. She closed her eyes and stopped fighting the burning sensation in her chest. Instead, she dove into it. She reached for that strange, static energy that had shattered the wine glass, the power that had blasted Thorn across the cell. She felt the connection to the forgotten, thick, rusted mental chains waiting to be taken up. She grabbed them. Her eyes snapped open. They were no longer brown. They were molten silver. As King Valerius lunged, claws extended to rip out Sisal's throat, she threw her hands forward. This time, it wasn't just a pulse of energy. It was a tidal wave. A blinding flash of silver light erupted from her body. It hit Valerius mid-air, knocking the massive alpha wolf backward as if he'd been struck by a cannonball. He smashed into the basalt dais, cracking the stone throne he had stolen 20 years ago. The shockwave didn't stop there. It rolled across the room, knocking guards and nobles off their feet, shattering the remaining windows. Only Davian and the kneeling forgotten remained standing, anchored by Sisol's will. Silence fell again, broken only by the groans of the injured. Valerius, bruised and bleeding, struggled to his feet. He looked at Sisal, and for the first time in his life, the Alpha King knew fear. She wasn't just a royal heir, she was a conduit for the raw, untamed magic of the moon itself. "The forgotten," Sisal spoke, her voice amplified by the energy coursing through her, echoing strangely in the ears of everyone present. "Heed your queen." The 3 kneeling monstrosities rose. They didn't look hunched and pathetic anymore. They looked terrifyingly competent. They flanked Sisal, a grotesque royal guard, awaiting her command. "You stole my life," Sisal said, walking slowly toward Valerius. The crowd parted for her, terrified, awestruck. "You murdered my parents. You enslaved my people. You turned your own son into a weapon to maintain your stolen power." "I did what was necessary for the strength of the pack," Valerius spat, though he backed away as she approached. "The silver blood was weak. They wouldn't do what needed to be done." "Strength isn't slaughter, Valerius," Sisal said sadly. She looked at Davian, who had shifted back to human form, standing bruised and breathing hard at her side. Strength is enduring what you did to us, and not becoming you. Valerius snarled, his pride unable to accept defeat by the runt. He pulled a hidden dagger from his waistband, the same cowardly move he had condemned in others, and threw it with desperate speed straight at Sisol's heart. It never reached her. One of the Forgotten moved with blurring speed, snatching the dagger out of the air with a massive, clawed hand. The creature crunched the metal blade in its palm as if it were dry leaves. Sisal didn't flinch. She looked at the usurper king, now disarmed and cowering against his broken throne. "I will not kill you," Sisal said. "That is your way. Death is too easy." She raised her hand, palm open toward him. The silver mark on her ribs pulsed violently. "I command the blood within you," she commanded, her voice vibrating with ancient authority. "Submit!" Valerius screamed as his own wolf turned against him. The forced submission to an alpha of immensely superior power was agony. He fell to his knees, fighting it, his veins bulging, but the ancient magic of the Silver Queens was absolute. He collapsed onto his face, whimpering, his alpha aura extinguished like a candle in a hurricane. He was no longer king. He was just a broken man on a dirty floor. Sisal turned to the stunned room. The nobility of the Obsidian Pack looked at the servant girl, who had just dethroned their tyrant with a wave of her hand. Davian stepped forward, taking her hand. His touch was grounding, warm against the icy fire in her veins. He looked at the crowd, then knelt on one knee before her, bowing his head in genuine submission. One by one, the guards dropped to their knees. Then the nobles. The entire ballroom bowed before the wolfless runt, the hidden queen, the breaker of chains. Sisal looked out at the sea of bowed heads, then up at Davian, the prince who had kicked her to save her, the tormentor who had become her shield. The reign of blood was over. The reign of silver had begun. The snow had covered the carnage in the courtyard, leaving the castle looking deceptive in its peaceful purity. Sisal stood on the ramparts, the obsidian crown heavy on her brow, a weight she was still learning to carry. The Forgotten prowled the tree line below, no longer mad, but vigilant guardians of the border. Davian stood beside her, no longer the prince of ice and cruelty. The shadows under his eyes were lighter, though the scars of his father's reign would take a lifetime to fade for both of them. He reached out, his fingers intertwining with hers. The static shock was gone, replaced by a steady, comforting hum of connection. They had defied a king, broken a curse, and rewritten the destiny of a kingdom that had tried to crush them. They learned that the loudest power isn't always the strongest, and that sometimes the most ferocious wolves are the ones hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right moon to rise. This story is just the beginning of their reign. If you enjoyed the rise of the Silver Queen and her Alpha Prince, please like, share, and subscribe for more tales from the Obsidian Kingdom. What do you think will happen to Valerius? Let us know in the comments.